I am Elias. I have stood in the ruins of courtrooms where justice was bought and sold, and in the silence of cells where the innocent waited for a verdict that was already written. I have learned that the loudest voice in a room is not always the one that speaks the truth. I have learned that power often screams, while authority is content to be silent. And I have come to believe that the most profound, most terrifying, and most beautiful silence in human history was the silence of a man from Nazareth, as he stood before the assembled power of the world and refused to defend himself. We are a species that defends itself. It is our most basic instinct. We argue, we justify, we explain, we attack. We build walls of words to protect our fragile egos, our reputations, our very lives. To be accused is to be summoned to the battlefield of language. To remain silent in the face of accusation is an act so unnatural, so contrary to our every instinct, that it borders on the insane or the divine. The story of the Passion of Jesus Christ is a story of many sounds. The weeping of his friends, the jeering of the crowd, the crack of the whip, the thud of the hammer. But the sound that echoes most loudly through the centuries is the sound of his silence. It is a silence that is not empty, but full. It is not a silence of weakness, but of an authority so absolute that it has no need of words. It is not the silence of a victim, but the silence of a king who is in complete control of his own surrender. To understand this silence, we must walk with him into the heart of the darkness. We must stand beside him in the flickering torchlight of the high priest's courtyard, in the cold marble hall of the Roman governor, and on the dusty, blood-soaked road to the cross. We must listen, not to the noise of his accusers, but to the deafening, world-changing power of his refusal to speak. The story begins in a garden, in the dead of night. It begins with a betrayal, a kiss that is a lie. He is arrested, bound like a common criminal, and dragged away. His friends, who had sworn to die with him, scatter into the darkness. He is utterly alone. He is brought first to the house of Annas, the old, cunning patriarch of the priestly clan, and then to the palace of Caiaphas, the high priest, where the Sanhedrin, the supreme council of the Jewish nation, has been hastily and illegally assembled. This is not a trial. It is a show trial. It is a desperate, frantic attempt to find a legal pretext for a decision that has already been made. He must die. The room is a cauldron of hatred and fear. The air is thick with the smell of oil lamps and the sweat of anxious men. The charges are a chaotic jumble of half-truths and outright lies. False witnesses are brought forward, but their stories do not agree. They claim he threatened to destroy the temple, but they cannot get their testimony straight. The prosecution is falling apart. Caiaphas is growing desperate. He needs a confession. He needs the accused to say something, anything, that can be twisted into a capital crime. He stands up, his robes of office a stark white in the gloom, and he confronts the prisoner. Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? And Jesus is silent. It is the first silence. It is a silence that is a judgment upon the proceedings. It is the silence of the truth in the face of a lie. It is the silence of a man who will not participate in a charade. His silence is not a refusal to answer. It is the answer. It says, your questions are not real questions. Your trial is not a real trial. Your authority is not real authority. I will not grant this proceeding the dignity of a defense, because it has no dignity. Caiaphas is enraged. The silence of the prisoner is a greater threat to his authority than any shouted defiance. He must break it. He resorts to his final, most solemn power. He places Jesus under a sacred oath. I adjure you by the living God, Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." This is a question that cannot be met with silence. It is a direct challenge, under the name of God himself. And so, Jesus speaks. But his words are not a defense. They are a declaration. "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." He does not defend himself. He proclaims himself. He takes their accusation and turns it into a prophecy of his own enthronement. He is not the one on trial here. They are. He is the judge, and he has just announced their sentence. The reaction is instantaneous. Caiaphas tears his robes, a theatrical gesture of manufactured horror. "He has uttered blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" The verdict is a foregone conclusion. A chorus of voices shouting, "He deserves to die." And then the scene descends into a brutal, chaotic violence. They spit in his face. They strike him with their fists. They cover his eyes and mock him. "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" And through it all, as the spittle runs down his face and the blows rain down upon him, he is silent. It is the silence of a love that does not retaliate. It is the silence of a strength that is so absolute that it can afford to absorb the hatred of the world without being diminished by it. It is the silence of the Lamb of God, who takes upon himself the sin of the world. From the chaos of the Sanhedrin, he is dragged, as the first light of dawn breaks over the city, to the Praetorium, the headquarters of the Roman governor. Here, the atmosphere is different. It is not the hot, religious fury of the priests, but the cold, pragmatic, and cynical power of Rome. Pontius Pilate is a man trapped in a political nightmare. He is a Roman governor in a rebellious, incomprehensible province. He despises the Jewish leaders, their endless, intricate religious disputes, but he needs to keep the peace. The Passover festival is a tinderbox, and he cannot afford a riot. He looks at the prisoner before him, a Galilean peasant, beaten and bound, and he sees a problem to be managed. The priests accuse Jesus of political crimes, of forbidding the payment of taxes to Caesar, of calling himself a king. They know that the charge of blasphemy means nothing to a Roman. They need a political charge, a charge of sedition. Pilate questions Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus speaks. But again, his words are not a defense. They are a question that turns the tables on his interrogator. "Do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say it to you about me?" He is asking Pilate, "Are you a man, a seeker of truth, or are you just a puppet of the crowd? Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" And Jesus gives the answer that has echoed through the centuries, an answer that defines the nature of his kingdom. "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world." This is the heart of the matter. He is a king, but his power is not the power that Pilate understands. It is not the power of legions, of swords, of political maneuvering. It is the power of truth. Pilate, the cynical Roman politician, is intrigued, and perhaps a little afraid. He asks the question that has become the motto of a world that has lost its way. What is truth? He does not wait for an answer. He is not interested in the answer. For him, truth is a matter of opinion, of perspective. The only real truth is the truth of power. He goes out to the crowd and declares, "I find no guilt in him." But the crowd, stirred up by the priests, roars for his crucifixion. Pilate is trapped. He tries to find a way out. He offers them the custom of releasing a prisoner at the Passover. He offers them a choice between Jesus and a man named Barabbas, a revolutionary, a murderer. And the crowd, in a moment of terrible, chilling clarity, chooses the murderer. "Crucify him!" they scream. Pilate, in a final, desperate attempt to satisfy their bloodlust without committing himself to a final verdict, has Jesus scourged. The scourging is not a minor punishment. It is a brutal, life-threatening ordeal. The Roman flagrum is a whip with multiple leather thongs tied with pieces of bone and metal. It is designed to tear the flesh from a man's body. The soldiers, with the casual cruelty of men who are bored and desensitized to violence, carry out their orders. The sound of the whip, the tearing of flesh, the spray of blood, and through it all, Jesus is silent. He does not cry out. He does not beg for mercy. He endures. It is the silence of a man who has become one with his suffering, who is offering it up, moment by moment, as a prayer. After the scourging, the soldiers engage in a mock coronation. They weave a crown of thorns and press it onto his head. They put a purple robe on his shoulders, a reed in his hand as a scepter. They kneel before him in mock homage. "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spit on him. They strike him on the head with the reed, and he is silent. It is the silence of a king whose kingship is not of this world, a king whose glory is hidden in his humiliation. Pilate presents him to the crowd one last time, a broken, bleeding, pathetic figure. "Behold the man," he says, hoping that this pitiable sight will satisfy them. But it does not. It only inflames their hatred. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate, defeated, washes his hands, a symbolic empty gesture of a man trying to absolve himself of a responsibility that is his alone. He hands Jesus over to be crucified. The silence of Jesus before his accusers is not an admission of guilt. It is a proclamation of a different kind of innocence, a different kind of power. It is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He is silent because he is the Lamb of God. His purpose is not to win an argument, but to become a sacrifice. A defense would be a contradiction of his very mission. He has come to take upon himself the sins of the world, and the first sin he takes upon himself is the sin of his own accusers. He absorbs their lies, their hatred, their injustice, and he does not return it. He breaks the cycle of violence by refusing to participate in it. His silence is a shield, but it is not a shield for himself. It is a shield for his enemies. It is a space of mercy, a moment in which they are given the opportunity to see what they are doing, to repent, but they do not. His silence is also an expression of his absolute obedience to the will of his Father. He has come to do the will of the one who sent him, and that will is that he should drink the cup of suffering to its dregs. To defend himself, to use his divine power to escape his fate, would be an act of disobedience. It would be to choose his own will over the will of the Father. It would be to repeat, in a sense, the sin of Adam. He is the new Adam, and his obedience in the face of death is the antidote to the disobedience that brought death into the world. His silence is the sound of his yes to the Father, a yes that is spoken not with his lips, but with his entire being. And finally, his silence is the silence of a truth that does not need to be defended. The truth is not an opinion, it is a reality. It does not need our arguments to make it true. It simply is. Jesus is the truth incarnate. His very presence is a judgment upon the lies of the world. To argue, to debate, would be to reduce the truth to the level of an opinion, to place it on the same level as the lies of his accusers. He is silent because the truth is silent. It does not scream. It simply stands and waits to be recognized. The journey to the cross is a journey of deepening silence. He is stripped of his clothes, of his dignity, of his last ounce of strength. He falls under the weight of the cross, and he is silent. He is nailed to the wood, the brutal, agonizing pain of the nails tearing through his flesh, and he is silent. But on the cross, he speaks. 7 times he breaks his silence. And these 7 words are not a defense. They are the final, perfect expression of his mission. He speaks a word of forgiveness for his executioners. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He speaks a word of promise to a repentant thief. "Today you will be with me in paradise." He speaks a word of love to his mother and his beloved disciple. "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." He speaks a word of desolation, the cry of a man who has taken upon himself the full weight of human sin and separation from God. My God, why have you forsaken me?" He speaks a word of physical suffering. "I thirst." He speaks a word of completion. "It is finished." And finally, he speaks a word of perfect, trusting surrender. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And then he is silent again. It is the silence of death, but it is a silence that is pregnant with the promise of a new life. It is the silence of the seed that falls into the ground and dies, so that it can bear much fruit. It is the silence of the tomb, which will, in 3 days, be broken by the sound of a stone being rolled away. I am Elias, and I have come to believe that the silence of Jesus is the loudest sound in the universe. It is the sound of a love that is stronger than death. It is the sound of a power that is made perfect in weakness. It is the sound of a truth that will, in the end, silence every lie. It is a silence that invites us into its own depths, a silence where we can, if we are brave enough to listen, hear the very heartbeat of God. Let us go back into that night and linger in the shadows, for the details of this injustice are the canvas on which the masterpiece of his silence is painted. The Sanhedrin's emergency session was a violation of its own laws. A capital trial was not to be held at night. It was not to be held on the eve of a Sabbath or a festival. A verdict of condemnation could not be pronounced on the same day as the trial. A day had to pass to allow for the possibility of mercy, for a change of heart. Every one of these laws was broken. This was not justice. It was a judicial lynching. The desperation of Caiaphas was not just the desperation of a man who hates the prisoner. It was the desperation of a man who fears him. Jesus was a threat, not because he was a military leader, but because he was a spiritual one. His authority did not come from a sword, but from the truth he spoke and the life he lived. He had cleansed the temple, an act that was a direct challenge to the commercial and religious authority of the priestly class. He had spoken of a kingdom that was not based on the meticulous observance of the law, but on a radical, interior conversion of the heart. He had healed on the Sabbath. He had forgiven sins, an act that was seen as a prerogative of God alone. To the religious establishment, he was a walking, talking revolution. He was a threat to their power, their wealth, their entire way of life. But more than that, he was a threat to their understanding of God. Their God was a God who could be managed, a God who could be contained within the intricate system of laws and rituals that they controlled. His God was a wild, unpredictable, and terrifyingly merciful Father. a God who seemed to care more for the outcast and the sinner than for the righteous and the powerful. This was the real blasphemy for which he was condemned. The charge of threatening to destroy the temple was a distortion of his words. He had spoken of the temple of his body, of a new kind of worship that would not be confined to a single building, but would take place in spirit and in truth. But his accusers, with the deliberate, literal-mindedness of those who refuse to understand, twisted his words into an act of terrorism. When Jesus finally breaks his silence before Caiaphas, his words are a thunderclap. By claiming the title, Son of Man, he is directly invoking the prophecy of Daniel, a vision of a divine figure who comes on the clouds of heaven to judge the world. He is not just claiming to be the Messiah, he is claiming to be the divine judge of his own judges. He is telling them that this sham trial is not the final word. There is a higher court, a higher throne, and on that throne, he will be the one who presides. The tearing of the robes by Caiaphas was not just a spontaneous act of piety. It was a legal signal. It was the formal declaration that blasphemy had been spoken, and that the trial could now proceed to its inevitable conclusion. The violence that follows, the spitting, the beating, the mockery, is not just a random outburst of brutality. It is a ritualized degradation. They are trying to unmake him, to strip him of his dignity, to reduce the man who claimed to be the Son of God to a pathetic, broken thing. They need to convince themselves that he is not who he says he is. Their violence is a measure of their own fear. The transfer to Pilate is a moment of supreme irony. The religious leaders of the chosen people, who prided themselves on their separation from the pagan world, now come begging for a judgment from a pagan governor. They, who would not enter the praetorium for fear of ritual defilement, have no problem handing over one of their own to be executed by the unclean hands of a Roman. This reveals the utter bankruptcy of their religious system. It has become a hollow shell, a set of external rules that has lost its heart. Pontius Pilate was a man of a certain type, a type that is all too common in the annals of power. He was a Roman equestrian, a mid-level administrator, a man whose career depended on his ability to maintain order in a notoriously difficult province. The historical sources we have, from Philo and Josephus, paint a picture of him as a man who was inflexible, stubborn, and often brutally insensitive to the religious sensibilities of the Jews. He had a history of provocative acts, of clashes with the local population. He was a man under pressure, a man who likely feared a negative report to the emperor. Tiberius, he was not a philosopher king. He was a bureaucrat with a sword. When Jesus stands before him, Pilate is not interested in theology. He is interested in risk assessment. Is this man a threat to Roman order? The accusation of kingship is a serious one. Rome had a long and bloody history of dealing with would-be kings. But Pilate, with the practiced eye of a man who understands power, looks at Jesus and sees no threat. He sees no army, no political faction, no revolutionary zeal. He sees a poor, itinerant preacher who speaks in riddles about a kingdom that is not of this world. Pilate's question, "What is truth?" is the weary, cynical question of a man who has seen too much of the world to believe in anything. For him, truth is a luxury. Power is the only reality. He knows Jesus is innocent. He says so, repeatedly. But he is more afraid of the living crowd than he is of his own conscience. He is more afraid of a riot than he is of committing a judicial murder. His primary goal is not to dispense justice, but to maintain his own position, to get through another difficult day. The choice he offers the crowd between Jesus and Barabbas is a masterstroke of political cowardice. Barabbas was not just a robber. The word used to describe him, lestes, is the same word Josephus uses to describe the zealots. the violent revolutionaries who sought to overthrow Roman rule. Barabbas was a terrorist, a murderer, a man who had committed the very crime of which Jesus was being falsely accused. Sedition against Rome. Pilate is offering the crowd a choice between a man of peace and a man of violence. He is asking them, "Who is your king? The one who offers you a kingdom of truth, or the one who offers you a kingdom of the sword?" And the crowd, in that terrible moment, chooses the sword. They choose the way of the world. They choose the kind of king they can understand, the kind of power they recognize. The scourging was a standard part of the Roman crucifixion process, but it was also a final attempt by Pilate to find a middle ground. He hoped that by brutalizing Jesus, by turning him into a bloody, pitiable object, he could satisfy the crowd's lust for violence without having to go all the way to execution. The scene of the exe homo, "Behold the man," is one of the most profound in all of literature. Pilate, the man of worldly power, presents Jesus, the man of divine power, to the world, and the world sees only weakness. They see a broken man, a failed king, a pathetic joke. They do not see the truth that is standing before them, that this brokenness is the place where God's power is being most perfectly revealed. They do not see that this crown of thorns is the only true crown, that this purple robe is the only true royal garment. They are blind, and their blindness is a choice. The silence of Jesus during the scourging and the mockery is perhaps the most difficult to comprehend. This is not just the silence of a man who is refusing to grant his accusers the dignity of a response. This is the silence of a man who is enduring an almost unimaginable degree of physical pain. It is a silence that speaks of a will that has been so completely united with the will of God that it has transcended the body's instinct to scream, to protest, to collapse. He is not just enduring the pain, he is inhabiting it. He is taking it into himself, transforming it from a meaningless act of brutality into a meaningful act of love. He is the great alchemist, turning the lead of human cruelty into the gold of divine mercy. The road to Golgotha is the final act of this silent drama. He is now so weakened that he cannot carry his own cross. The soldiers compel a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, to carry it for him. This is a moment of profound symbolism. The cross is too heavy for any one man to bear, even the God-man. He allows us, in the person of Simon, to enter into his suffering, to participate in his redemptive work. He does not carry the cross for us, in the sense of taking away our own struggles. He carries it with us. His silence on this final journey is the silence of exhaustion, but it is also the silence of focus. He is a man on a mission. And every step, every breath, is a movement towards the completion of that mission. He is walking towards his throne, and his throne is a cross. The 7 last words from the cross are the breaking of the great silence, and they are the key to its meaning. They are not random utterances. They are a final, perfect summary of his entire life and teaching. In his forgiveness of his enemies, he reveals the heart of his Father, a heart of unconditional, scandalous mercy. In his promise to the good thief, he reveals that his kingdom is open to anyone, even at the last moment, who turns to him in faith. In his care for his mother, he reveals that his divine mission does not negate his human love. In his cry of desolation, he enters into the deepest darkness of the human experience, the feeling of being utterly abandoned by God. And in doing so, he redeems it. He sanctifies our own moments of despair. In his thirst, he expresses not just a physical need, but a spiritual one, a thirst for the love and the faith of humanity. In his declaration that it is finished, he is not sighing in relief that his suffering is over. He is shouting in triumph that his mission is accomplished. The work of redemption is complete. And in his final surrender to the Father, He provides the model for our own death, a model of perfect trust and peaceful surrender. After that final word, the silence returns. But it is a different kind of silence. It is the silence of a finished work. It is the silence of a victory that has been won. It is the silence of the Sabbath, the rest of God after the work of the new creation. The world thinks it has silenced him. The priests are satisfied. Pilate is relieved. The crowd has gone home. But in the silence of the tomb, a new sound is beginning to stir. It is the sound of a new life, a new creation, a new kingdom. It is the sound of a silence that is about to be broken forever by the thunder of the resurrection. I am Elias, and I have come to understand that the silence of Jesus is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the presence of a love that is so total that it has no need to defend itself. It is the presence of a power so absolute that it can manifest itself in what the world sees as the most abject weakness. It is the presence of a truth so profound that it can be spoken in a single, unending, and eloquent silence. To learn to listen to that silence is to learn the language of God. It is to learn that our own frantic need to justify ourselves, to win our arguments, to protect our egos, is a form of spiritual poverty. It is to learn that true strength is found in surrender. True victory is found in sacrifice, and true life is found in the willingness to die to ourselves. The silent Christ stands as an eternal judgment upon our noisy, self-assertive world, and he stands as an eternal invitation, an invitation to enter into his silence. The peace of a soul that has nothing to prove, nothing to defend, and nothing to fear. The peace of a soul that is resting in perfect trust in the hands of a loving Father. Let us not move too quickly from this scene of judgment. Let us stand with Pilate for a moment longer, in the cold light of his pragmatism. The Roman mind was a marvel of engineering, of law, of administration. It built roads, aqueducts, and empires. It understood logic, order, and the clear, brutal arithmetic of power. A kingdom was a thing of territory, of taxes, of legions. A king was a man who commanded armies and dispensed a justice that could be seen and felt. When Jesus speaks of a kingdom that is not of this world, to Pilate, this is not a profound spiritual truth, it is nonsense. It is the rambling of a religious fanatic, a man detached from the hard realities of the world. Pilate's question, "What is truth?" is not the question of a philosopher seeking wisdom. It is the exasperated sigh of a practical man who has no time for abstractions. For Pilate, truth is what works. Truth is what maintains order. Truth is what keeps Rome in power and keeps him in his job. The man before him, this silent, beaten Galilean, is not a threat to that truth. He is an inconvenience. His innocence is an inconvenient fact. The hatred of the priests is an inconvenient reality. Pilate's task is to navigate these inconveniences with the least amount of political damage to himself. He is so focused on the mechanics of power that he is blind to the presence of the author of power. He is so concerned with the truth of the situation that he fails to recognize the truth of the universe standing before him, robed in his own blood. His hand-washing is the perfect symbol of his entire worldview. It is an attempt to find a purely external, procedural solution to a profound moral and spiritual crisis. He believes that by performing the correct ritual, he can wash away his own responsibility, but the water does not cleanse him. It only highlights the stain. He declares himself innocent of this man's blood, but his hands are dripping with the guilt of his own cowardice. The silence of Jesus before Pilate is the silence of two different languages being spoken. Jesus is speaking the language of eternity, of sacrifice, of a kingdom built on love. Pilate is speaking the language of time, of power, of a kingdom built on swords. There is no common ground. An argument would be pointless. A defense would be a translation of the divine into the political, a reduction of the eternal to the temporary. Jesus will not make that translation. He allows the two realities to stand side by side. In stark, silent contrast, he allows Pilate and the world he represents to judge itself. And the verdict is damning. Now consider the crowd. The crowd is not a simple, monolithic entity. It is a complex, shifting organism, a creature of emotion and suggestion. It is likely that many in this crowd had, only a few days before, welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem with shouts of Hosanna, waving palm branches, hailing him as the promised son of David. Now, they scream for his death. What has changed? They have been disappointed. They were hoping for a political Messiah, a warrior king who would drive out the Romans and restore the earthly glory of Israel. They were hoping for a Barabbas. When they see Jesus, beaten and silent before the power of Rome, they see a failure. He is not the king they wanted. He has not fulfilled their expectations. Their adoration, which was built on a foundation of worldly hope, curdles into a bitter, violent resentment. The priests, who are masters of crowd psychology, exploit this disappointment. They move through the crowd, whispering, agitating, stoking the flames of their anger. They present the choice between Jesus and Barabbas as a choice between a failed Messiah and a true patriot. They turn the crowd into a weapon, a blunt instrument to force Pilate's hand. The cry of, "Crucify him," is the cry of a people's broken dreams. It is the terrible, primal scream of a hope that has turned to hatred. And Jesus is silent. He is silent because he knows that their hatred is not really for him. It is for the God they have created in their own image, the God who has failed to give them what they wanted. He is silent because he is the true king, and his love is not dependent on their approval. He loves them in their adoration, and he loves them in their hatred. His love is a constant, a reality that does not change, even when their fickle emotions have turned against him. His silence is the silence of a love that is patient, a love that is willing to be rejected, a love that is waiting for the day when their eyes will be opened. This silence must also be understood in the context of the divine plan of salvation. The scriptures of the Old Testament, which Jesus knew intimately, had foretold this moment. The figure of the suffering servant in the book of Isaiah is the clearest prophecy of the Passion. This servant is one who is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He is one who is led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Jesus' silence is a conscious, deliberate act of fulfilling this prophecy. He is not a passive victim of fate. He is the active protagonist of a story that was written before the foundation of the world. He is walking a path that has been laid out for him, a path of suffering and sacrifice that leads to the redemption of humanity. To defend himself would be to deviate from that path. It would be to rewrite the story. It would be to say that there is another way to save the world, a way that does not involve the cross. But he knows that there is no other way. The cross is not a tragic accident. It is the chosen instrument of God's love. It is the place where the justice of God and the mercy of God meet in a terrible, beautiful embrace. It is the only place where the sin of the world can be defeated. His silence is the silence of a man who has accepted his destiny, who has embraced his mission, who is walking towards his throne with a steady, unwavering resolve. It is the silence of a love that knows that the only way to conquer death is to enter into it, to swallow it whole, and to destroy it from the inside. This is the great paradox of the Passion. The moment of Jesus' greatest weakness in the eyes of the world is the moment of his greatest power. The moment of his greatest humiliation is the moment of his greatest glory. The moment of his most profound silence is the moment when he is speaking the most powerful word the universe has ever heard. It is the word of a love that is willing to be broken, to be poured out, to be silenced, so that a broken, silent, and dying world can be made whole again. I am Elias, and when I stand in the noise of my own life, in the clamor of my own fears and my own desperate need to be right, to be understood, to be vindicated, I try to remember that silence. I try to remember that there is a power that does not need to shout, a strength that does not need to strike back, a truth that does not need to argue. It is a silence that feels like a death, but it is the only path to a real life. It is the silence of the cross, and it is the silence that precedes the resurrection. It is the silence that saves the world, and it is the silence that is waiting, even now, to save us.